Good morning, friends. We're going to read Little Miss Whoops and the Garden Goof Up. I'm going to hold it back for you. We're going to look at a page before I start reading. And then I'm going to come in front of the camera and read to you. We have some words that you can help me read along with. We have Mr. Grumpy, phone, Little Miss Whoops, garden, door, Mr. Scatterbrain, elf, sock, hat, popcorn maker, trees, corn, tomatoes, house, and clocks. So, as we read our story this morning, I want you to help me read along. Okay, we've already turned to the last page to see what the pictures mean, so you can help me, all right? Okay, one day, Mr. Grumpy picked up the phone. He called Mrs. Whoops's garden shop. "I need some work done in my garden," he said. And there he is, and he looks like he's feeling grumpy. Soon, there was a knock at Mr. Grumpy's door. That's right. He opened the door. Mr. Scatterbrain and Miss Whoops were there. Miss Whoops was holding a broken, remember that picture? Garden gnome. And they actually use the word elf, okay? So I'll change it over to elf. I know him as a garden gnome, but we'll call him an elf. "Mrs. Whoops," shouted Mr. Grumpy, "what happened to my elf?" "It was an accident." Mrs. Whoops handed the elf to Mr. Grumpy. That's right. "We are ready to work on your garden," said Mr. Scatterbrain. "I have my sock puppet, my hat, and my popcorn maker." Kind of strange, huh? "Stop being silly, Mr. Scatterbrain," said Mr. Grumpy. I wonder why he said that. Maybe some of you know why he said that. "Here is the garden," said Mr. Grumpy. "I want these trees trimmed." Very good. "Just a little bit." "Don't worry, Mr. Grumpy," said Mrs. Whoops. "I am great at trimming trees." Ooh, look at those trees. Do you see there's some fruit up there? Looking at the color, it's orange. But looking at the shape, I think it might not be an orange. Let's see. "And over here, I want you to plant corn, carrots, and tomatoes," said Mr. Grumpy. "No problem," said Mr. Scatterbrain. "I've always wanted to plant a garden." "You have never planted a garden?" asked Mr. Grumpy. "Don't worry, Mr. Grumpy," said Miss Whoops. "Your garden is safe with us." Mr. Grumpy went back to his house. Mrs. Whoops and Mr. Scatterbrain got to work. "Trimming these trees will be easy," said Mrs. Whoops. But it was not easy at all. The saw pulled Mrs. Whoops through the trees. She cut down every tree she passed. Mrs. Whoops and her saw were out of control. Oh no! Mrs. Whoops finally stopped the saw. She looked around. "I think the trees look great," she said. "I agree," said Mr. Scatterbrain. Mr. Scatterbrain looked at the corn and tomato seeds. "What a silly way to plant a garden," he said. This will take too long. Mr. Scatterbrain went to the superstore. A row of corn and a row of tomatoes, he said. What else did Mr. Grumpy want in his garden? I know, said Mr. Scatterbrain. Corn, tomatoes, and clocks. Great job, Mr. Scatterbrain, said Mrs. Whoops. That's pretty silly, isn't it? Just then, Mr. Grumpy came outside. My garden, he shouted. Mrs. Whoops. Mr. Scatterbrain, what have you done to my garden? Mr. Grumpy began to cry. He doesn't look like Mr. Grumpy anymore, does he? He looks like Mr. Sad. Mr. Scatterbrain is looking so proud of himself still. We are so glad you like it, said Mr. Scatterbrain. Another great garden, said Mrs. Whoops. Come on, Mr. Scatterbrain, on to our next job. And that brings us to the last page with all of our words. You guys can say them with me again. Mr. Grumpy, phone, Little Miss Whoops, garden, door, Mr. Scatterbrain, elf, sock, hat, popcorn maker, trees, corn, tomatoes, house, and clocks. That was a really silly book, wasn't it? So on the back, I'm going to show you. Okay. There are some more characters here, and what I'll try to do is get you some more books that you can read. I know that some of our friends in class really liked the Mr. Men show that we were able to watch during lunchtime. I know it makes me really sad that we're not going to get to have lunch again together, but at least I can start reading you guys some stuff or finding you some stuff that we used to do in the classroom. So I hope you guys have a good day. I'll post videos of my garden and some flowers from last week. I took a video for you guys during spring break, and I will upload that for you guys. Okay? Bye.